what I want to do is show you guys a little trick that I use every once in a while to make things go faster than getting out the big framing square and doing a whole bunch of jigging in order to get the bird's mouth cuts made of my rafter. So come on with me here, guys. I just got this rafter up here and I haven't cut it to length or done anything with it. It is exactly the length it was in the log form. I think it's about 12 foot 8 inches, give or take. What I typically do first is I think back to what my slope was, or my pitch was, and I came up with a 3 by 12 pitch, or 3 to 12. Basically every foot it runs, it goes up 3 inches. Now in this case, that's going to be very critical because that is going to be a number that I look at on my speed square when I'm starting to cut my bird's mouths. Now when I talk about a bird's mouth, I'm basically talking about the cut in my rafter that allows it to sit flat on top of my beams, and I have 2 of them. So I'm going to need 2 bird's mouth cuts. I've already made one of those bird mouth cuts. In fact, I made 2 of them on one of my rafters, but I'm going to show you guys how I do it sometimes to do it more quickly than the framing square. Here's what I do. I get the rafter, I crown it, meaning I look down it and I see which way it's sort of bending. Typically every piece of lumber has a bit of a crown to it. I put that crown facing up with the thought that as it settles, it flattens out. The other thing I do is I cut it to length first and foremost, and then I lay it up where it's going to go. I position it so that I have the overhang on the front and the back of the building that I want. In this case, let's just pretend I'm doing that. All right, and we're just sort of playing around here a little bit. So let's just pretend that's where it was going to go. What you have to be certain of is it is sitting on the mark where the rafter will be attached. So you have to make sure that this is plumb, that that's plumb, and you have to make sure you've made all your layout lines on top of the on top of the beams. That way it's not sort of cockeyed like this or this, so that when you make these cuts, they're sitting exactly where they're going to sit when you secure it. Let's pretend this is where it was going to go. What I do is I take my speed square and I can actually just sort of hold it up against the beam here, and you can decide which way you hold it. And just so you can see on this side, I hold it up against that beam, and then I take my pencil and I make a mark, and I'm going to mark on this side of it. All right, see that line there? That line, if you were to continue it downwards, would be flush with the face of the beam. I make a mark there, and I go to the back of the beam. And if you guys swing around here, you guys will see what I'm talking about. Imagine I had that flush, and I make a mark. All right, so you guys can watch me do it here. I'm going to mark it like this. You guys see that? And let's do it a little better on this side. I'm going to hold it just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure that hasn't moved, and I'm going to go up and repeat the process. And if we lower this down here a little bit, what you're going to notice is I have 2 lines here. My seat cut, which I'll explain in a minute, is more or less going to go across like this, and my plum cut is going to go down like that. I'm going to be cutting out this material right here. That is going to sit nice and flat on top of the beam. That's going to be one of my bird's mouth cuts. The other one's going to be up there. Let's go to the saw for a minute, and I'll show you exactly how this gets set up with my speed square. All right, guys. Well, here's our rafter, and there's the 2 lines that we just scribed onto this rafter over there when it was up on top of the beam. Now, you can always tell if those lines are where they should be if you're to take your speed square, and we'll flip it the right way. If you line up your speed square with that line you just drew, and you use the very corner here where it says pivot as a pivot, you should be able to read over here to this number, which is along the common rafter line, and you should see the number 3, which is correct for our case because it's a pitch of 312 for the roof. If this is something else, you should go back and double check the line you scribed, because that means that that line is not at the correct angle. At this point of the game, what I would do if I haven't gone all the way up the rafter, I would continue that line. You can hold it like this, or you can go back to the pivot point, position it at the 3, and scribe your line. And then you would do the same thing down here. You're basically just continuing the line. All right, this more or less gives you the window where your bird's mouth is going to be, where you're going to be cutting. And so if you can imagine, you know the thickness of that beam. It's 4 inches. In your case, it might be something different. So if you take your speed square along this edge here, notice it's got the dimensions in inches, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 4 inches. If you keep this side of the speed square right on that line there, and make sure you come down right to this edge with the pivot point, like so. What you're going to notice is from that pivot point over to this line, it should be the dimensions of your beam, the width. In this case, it's 4 inches, so that's perfect. Make sure, once again, the speed square is lined up. And what you're going to get is you're going to get a line that shows you where you're cutting. This down here is going to be your bird's mouth. Right here along this top, we're going to call that the seat cut. That cut there, you call it the plum cut. Plum cut, seat cut forms the bird's mouth. That's what we're cutting out. As I mentioned, we also would have made these 2 marks at the upper beam. And so I would just shuffle down the rafter, go up to the upper part of the beam, or upper part of the rafter, excuse me, and make the same type of cut. So that's what I've done already on one of my rafters. Mind you, this can be accomplished with a framing square, but in this case, this is quite a bit faster. And you guys can see here, here's the finished product. And obviously the marks we made before, the rafter wasn't in the final position, but this rafter is in the final position. So what I do is I take this rafter and then I use it as my template. And I basically just trace out where we're going to cut. And you'll see that in just a minute.